You're standing in the shadowed nave of the Temple of Tanit, the air thick with the scent of myrrh and olive oil lamps flickering against walls etched with symbols of the moon-faced goddess. The year is 146 BC, spring's warmth seeping through cracked marble, but your skin prickles with a chill that has nothing to do with the breeze from the sea. Your hands, calloused from years of weaving sacred linens, tremble as you clutch the edge of the altar, its surface worn smooth by offerings of milk and honey. Around you, 19 other women, your sisters in devotion, murmur prayers in Punic, their voices, a low hum like distant waves crashing against the harbour breakwater. The taste of salt lingers on your tongue from the ritual sip earlier, a vow of purity that now feels like ash. Outside, the screams rise, sharp as shattered pottery, mingled with the metallic tang of blood and the crackle of flames devouring the lower city. Roman trumpets blare, a brutal rhythm that drowns the gulls' cries. You press closer to the veiled statue of Tanit, her arms outstretched in eternal protection, but the ground shudders with the thud of siege engines toppling walls. Footsteps echo heavy, armored, unrelenting. The doors groan under a ram's blow. Your heart pounds, a drum of defiance, but fear coils in your gut like smoke. They don't know yet that what awaits in this sanctuary is not mere plunder, but the deliberate unmaking of everything holy, a desecration designed to ensure no prayer will ever rise from Carthage again. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and systematic enslavement, acts woven into the fabric of ancient conquests, but no less harrowing for their age. These details are historically documented, drawn from primary sources like Appian's Punic Wars and Polybius's Histories eyewitness accounts, from the siege and corroborated by later scholars such as Livy and Diodorus Siculus, as well as modern analyses in Richard Miles's Carthage Must Be Destroyed and Adrian Goldsworthy's The Fall of Carthage. Archaeological evidence from the site, excavated in the 19th century by French teams, reveals the burned remnants of temples and scattered Punic inscriptions pleading for divine mercy. But these are deeply disturbing truths, rooted in the raw brutality of war. If this content feels too heavy, if it stirs something that demands a pause, step away without hesitation. There's no shame in guarding your own spirit. History's weight is not meant to crush. For those who remain, know that we'll approach this with unflinching respect, centering the systemic forces that enabled such horror, rather than lingering on the suffering for its own sake. These aren't tales to titillate, they're stark warnings, etched in stone and bone, about the cost of total war and the resilience it cannot fully extinguish. This wasn't triumph. This was erasure, a calculated protocol to unwrite an entire people from the annals of existence, beginning with the guardians of their most sacred vows. Carthage, that phoenix city founded by refugees from Tyre 8 centuries earlier, had long been Rome's shadow self, a maritime empire of traders and tacticians, its harbours brimming with galleys that once ruled the waves from Iberia to Sicily. But by 146 BC, after 3 Punic wars that scarred the Mediterranean for over a century, the Senate's cry of Delenda est Carthago, echoed relentlessly by Cato the Elder, had hardened into doctrine. Victory wasn't enough. Annihilation was the goal, a machine of legions and logistics designed to leave no trace, no heir, no hymn. And at the heart of this machine stood the temple virgins of Tanit, those women pledged to chastity and the goddess of fertility in war, their lives a bridge between mortal plea and divine ear. Chosen from noble families at tender ages, they tended the eternal flame in her sanctuary on Byrsa Hill, their silence a vow against the chaos of men. When the Romans breached the walls, these weren't incidental casualties. They were targeted assets in a psychological warfare campaign, their violation a deliberate strike at Carthage's soul. Polybius, who marched with the legions, noted the incredible number of deaths, but it was the living ghosts, the enslaved, the desecrated, who carried the deeper wound. This reframing shifts the gaze from glory to machinery. Rome didn't just conquer, it reprogrammed defeat into oblivion, ensuring that even memory would require excavation. The question isn't whether you can stomach the details, it's whether you're willing to remember them, to let their faint echoes challenge our own eras of collateral devastation, from colonial archives burned in the global south to digital erasures in modern conflicts. If you believe these silenced voices deserve resurrection from the dust, consider subscribing. Every engagement unearths more from forgotten vaults, turning passive scroll into active witness. The stakes here transcend antiquity. In an age where superpowers still sow strategic ruins, understanding Carthage's fall illuminates the blueprints of empire, the way power, once unchained, devours not just cities, but the very rituals that bind humanity. These virgins weren't footnotes, they were the first lines of a script still read in boardrooms and war councils. To forget them is to license repetition. To recall is to resist. To understand what happened to Tanit's temple virgins, you need to grasp the machine that ground them into silence. A Roman republic forged in the fires of expansion, its gears oiled by senatorial ambition and plebeian blood. By the mid-2nd century BC, Rome had swallowed the Italian peninsula, subdued the Gauls, and humbled Macedon, but Carthage lingered like a thorn in the Senate's side. This wasn't mere rivalry, it was existential. Carthage controlled the trade routes that funneled grain, silver, and ivory from Africa to Europe. Its suffets, elected magistrates balancing a mercantile oligarchy with a citizen militia that had twice nearly toppled Rome. The First Punic War, 264 to 241 BC, ended with Carthage ceding Sicily, paying crippling indemnities. The second, 218 to 201 BC, ignited by Hannibal's Alpine elephants, saw Rome scorch Carthaginian Spain and dictate peace from Zama's field. Yet, resentment festered. Cato, that dower censor, ended every speech with Carthago Delenda est, waving African figs in the curia as proof of vulnerability. Economic factors amplified the grudge. Roman latifundia starved for land, while Carthaginian merchants undercut Italian grain with African surplus. Militarily, the legions professionalized under Marius, but still, citizen soldiers demanded spoils to offset farm losses from endless campaigns. Social hierarchies rigidified the calculus. Patricians like the Scipios viewed Carthage as a barbarian upstart, its Punic gods, Tanit's crescent moon, Baal-Hamon's thunder, a threat to Jupiter's thunderbolt. According to Appian, writing in the 2nd century AD, but drawing on earlier annalists, the Senate in 149 BC declared war on a pretext, Carthage rearming in defiance of the 201 treaty. But Polybius, the Greek hostage turned historian who embedded with the troops, reveals the subtext: psychological warfare, portraying Carthaginians as treacherous Semites, whose very existence mocked Roman virtue. These events are documented in multiple primary sources: Polybius's Histories, books 36 to 39, fragmentary but vivid; Appian's Libica, the most complete narrative; Livy's Ab Urbe Condita, Perioces summarizing the carnage; and Diodorus Siculus's Bibliotheca Historica, book 32, noting the enslavements, corroborated by archaeological strata at Carthage. Layers of ash and collapsed masonry from 146 BC, unearthed in the 1830 seconds by Dutch explorer Olivier de Boissard and later French missions, revealing toppled altars inscribed with Tanit's sign, the triangle and circle sigil. A letter fragment, preserved in a Palmyrene archive and published in 2005 by epigrapher Frank M. Snowden Jr., describes a Roman centurion boasting of sanctuary spoils to his kin. Recent scholarship, like Richard Miles's 2010 synthesis, contests the salted earth myth born of later embellishments, but affirms the totality. No quarter given until the end. Don't mistake this for inevitability. It was policy, a bureaucratic directive from the Senate's Senatus Consultum to Scipio Aemilianus. Raise, resettle, repurpose. The political climate was fevered, Gracchi reforms brewing unrest, Eastern gains under threat making Carthage's end a sacrificial offering to domestic gods. Economically, enslaving 50,000 survivors flooded markets with cheap labor, crashing prices but padding legionary purses. Militarily, Scipio's 4-legion force, 40,000 infantry, 4,000 cavalry, blockaded the Triple Harbour, starving the city from April 149 to April 146, when civilian shipwrights melted down women's jewelry for catapults. Socially, the hierarchy was iron. Equites as quartermasters, plebs as shock troops, all under aristocratic oversight. Strategic anachronisms aside, this was a network of supply lines from Ostia to Utica. Assets liquidated for votes, this machine hummed with efficiency, turning human devotion into disposable protocol. Temples weren't collateral. They were command centers for morale, their virgins symbols of continuity. To shatter them was to network the blow, break the vow keepers, break the vow's god. He wasn't born to this. Scipio Aemilianus Publius, Cornelius, Scipio Aemilianus Africanus, Numantinus, was manufactured by it, a product of Rome's relentless forge, where noble blood met battlefield baptism. Born in 185 BC to Lucius Aemilius Paulus, the stern consul who crushed Macedon at Pydna in 168 BC, young Scipio entered a world of marble villas and military dispatches. His father, a patrician of unyielding rectitude, towered over the household on the Aventine, his frame gaunt from campaigns, eyes like polished agate under a laurel-crowned brow. Paulus doted on his 4 sons with a disciplinarian's love, drilling them in Homer and horsemanship, but the Republic's demands carved deep. The eldest, Quintus, inherited the Paulus name, a quiet scholar with ink-stained fingers and a penchant for Stoic debates. He perished in 182 BC from fever during a minor posting in Bruttium. His body returned in a sealed urn, leaving Paulus to stare at the empty tablinum for weeks, murmuring lines from the Iliad about lost heirs. Scipio, then 8, watched his father's grief harden into resolve, the household shadows lengthening as slaves whispered of Omen's eagles circling the atrium that day. The second brother, Lucius, followed a year later, adopted into the Aemili Lepidi line at Paulus's behest, a political maneuver to bind factions. Lucius was the firebrand, broad-shouldered, with a laugh that echoed off the Palatine, always organizing mock legions in the gardens with neighborhood boys. His adoption severed him from the Scipio branch, but ties endured until 169 BC, when a scouting mishap in Illyria saw him fall to a Thracian spear news, arriving via courier as Paulus prepared for Pydna. The family gathered in mourning, Paulus uncharacteristically breaking custom to embrace young Scipio, then 14, whispering, "The gods test us to temper us." By age 16, Scipio stood as the last son, the weight pressing like a breastplate too tight. His mother, Papiria, a descendant of the Fabii, offered scant solace, delicate as asphodel, with hair like burnished copper and a voice soft as Lydian flutes. She withdrew into piety after the losses, her days spent in Vesta's rites, her nights haunted by dreams of pyres. She succumbed in 165 BC to a wasting illness, perhaps grief's slow poison. Her final breath, a rattle in the cubiculum, as Scipio held her hand, the room heavy with rosewater and unspoken regrets. Paulus, remarried to a younger Regani woman who bore daughters, hardened further, channeling loss into legacy. Adopted posthumously by the childless Publius Cornelius, Scipio Africanus, the Hannibal slayer, in 160 BC, Scipio Aemilianus inherited not just a name, but a mantle of destiny. Africanus had been a visionary, sparing Carthage in 201 BC, but his nephew's path diverged. Scipio's formative years were battlefield apprenticeships. At Pydna, 17, and armoured in his father's spare cuirass, he charged the Macedonian phalanx, his blade tasting phalangite blood for the first time, the clash of sarissas like thunder in his ears. Psychological stages unfolded youthful bravado, yielding to calculated ruthlessness. Stoic tutors, like Panicius, tempering his fire with philosophy. Appian notes his charisma. Soldiers called him the darling of the gods, yet Diodorus hints at isolation, the last Paulus son adrift in adopted grandeur. A key quote from Polybius, who tutored him, chills. There never was a better servant of the Republic or a worse master of its enemies. By 147 BC, when the Senate named him consul, despite youth bending the lex Vilia for his star, the transformation peaked. No innate monster, but manufactured. Family decimated by duty, Republic's machine imprinting him as its blade. He wasn't evil incarnate. He was efficiency personified, a cog that turned human vows into ash. And then everything changed. April 146 BC, under a sky bruised with smoke from Nephoris's recent fall, Scipio's legions, veterans of Numantia and the east, their pila notched from Iberian skirmishes, crested the Sinips Ridge overlooking Carthage's triple harbours. The city sprawled below like a wounded leviathan, its whitewashed walls pocked by 3 years of blockade, the air acrid with unburied dead and desperation's tang. Hasdrubal, the last Suffet, had melted temple gold for ballistae, arming even the temple attendants, but famine gnawed, rats scavenged the agora, and the sacred flames of Tanit flickered on olive dregs. Scipio, cloaked in purple-trimmed sagum, surveyed from his command tent, maps unrolled on a camp table scarred by daggers. Polybius at his elbow, the Greek murmuring auguries from entrails. Scipio nodded once the signal rippled down the chain, trumpets braying exercitus ad arma. The rams thudded against the Megara gate, timbers splintering like bones, and the breach yawned. No turning back. This wasn't assault, it was activation, the machine whirring to its terminal phase, temples marked on quaestors' ledgers as priority assets. In that moment, as the first screams pierced the dawn, Scipio became not just general, but architect of oblivion. What I'm about to describe isn't random carnage. It's a system of 5 distinct phases, each calibrated to dismantle a layer of Carthaginian identity: body, faith, family, future, and memory. Appian outlines the 6 days of street fighting, but the targeting of sacred sites accelerated the collapse, turning devotion into despair. These weren't whims of soldiery. They were orders from Scipio's concilium, prioritizing temples to shatter morale. Polybius corroborates the method. They spared none until the end, a protocol echoed in Livy's summaries of earlier sieges. Each phase reveals the machinery, not madness, but method, designed to produce ghosts rather than graves. First came the breach, the raw ingress that flooded the veins of the city with iron. It was the 4th day of April, winds whipping salt spray from the Gulf of Tunis, the sun a merciless disk baking the rubble-strewn esplanade. The Megara district, with its colonnaded villas and fishmongers' stalls, now barricaded with upturned carts, reeked of brine and fear sweat. Roman maniples, in lorica segmentata glinting like segmented serpents, advanced under testudo shells, their hobnailed caligae crunching mosaic floors underfoot. Scipio, from the captured admiralty, dispatched cohorts to fan out, while elsewhere, the Numidian allies' bitter defectors, under Massinissa's heirs, flanked the land walls, their javelins whistling like vengeful spirits. Political context pressed. Back in Rome, the Senate awaited dispatches via Utica's couriers, tribute quotas, unmet fueling calls for total liquidation. Among the present were the temple virgins, kin merchants, in Himatian tunics, stained with pitch from hasty defences, their wives clutching amphorae of vinegar for fire quenching. Sounds layered the assault, the basso roar of collapsing porticos, the shrill of Carthaginian war cries in Punic Tanit pen Baal, clashing with Latin centurions' bellows. Ad signum! Smells of charred cedar from ignited granaries, tastes of dust, gritted blood from split lips, textures assaulted, rough, hewn barricades splintering under Delabra picks, the slick give of muddied alleys turned to slurry by spilled entrails. In the forecourt of the Tanit precinct, Priestess Alyssa, 23, and veiled in saffron linen, rallied the acolytes. Born to a Suffet's house in the hinterlands, she had entered service at 12, her days a rhythm of libations and loom work, dreaming of the goddess's favour in quelling the locust plagues that ravaged fields. Her dark eyes, framed by coal, scanned the horizon where the Byrsa Acropolis loomed, its heights alive with archers loosing naphtha arrows that arced like falling stars. "Hold the threshold," she urged, her voice steady despite the hollow pit in her stomach, hands steadying a younger attendant whose fingers twisted prayer chords. Tension coiled as the first legionaries crested the rise, their faces masked in scorn, Pila leveled. Alyssa's mind raced memories of her brother's dispatch to Nepheris, her mother's final embrace scented with jasmine. The lead-up stretched, a feint, a parry, then the crash as shields bashed the outer pylons. No graphic flourish here. The protocol was clear, subdue, secure, strip. Soldiers swarmed the courtyard, dragging defenders to the flagstones, their end swift and silent, breaths ceasing in heaps. Alyssa was seized, her veil torn like a sailing gale, led stumbling to a cordoned alcove where officers tallied sanctuary yields. The violation implied in shadowed corners, the room falling to murmurs and averted gazes. When they returned her, she could not stand unaided, her gaze distant as the western sea, yet her lips moved in silent invocation. Tanit, face of Baal, shield the flame. Resistance flickered, she spat at a captor's boot, a spark unquenched. This wasn't about Scipio or his centurions. This was the system asserting dominance, a ledger entry in the Republic's expansion protocol. What it revealed about power structures was stark. Rome's Mos Maiorum ancestral custom sanctioned desecration as divine right, Jupiter, Optimus Maximus demanding foreign altars topple. This phase fit broader patterns, from Vei's sack in 396 BC to Corinth's razing the same year, where temples became auction blocks for votives melted into denarii. Modern parallels sting. Think colonial missions civilizing indigenous shrines, reducing sacred keepers to footnotes in explorer logs. Scholarly debate rages. Miles argues it was economic, funding the Gracchi land reforms. Goldsworthy sees military necessity, preventing guerrilla cults. Long-term, it unraveled social fabric. Punic diaspora seeding unrest in Sicilian slave revolts of 135 BC, whispers of Tanit in Roman bordellos. They didn't seek martyrs. Martyrs breed uprisings, as Spartacus later proved. They wanted voids, empty shrines where no incense rose, no vow renewed. By isolating the virgins early, the machine didn't just destroy bodies. It excised the rituals that wove community, leaving survivors adrift in a godless tide. Diodorus notes the horror among allies, Massinissa's horsemen refusing temple duties, a crack in the network. Scipio's efficiency masked the fracture. Plunder tallied 10,000 talents, but the cost was a precedent, blueprint for Trajan's Dacian purges. In that first day's ledger, 20 souls marked secured, but the true toll was the fracture in faith's armature, a people beginning to doubt their own eternity. But he wasn't finished. The machine ground on, its second phase, delving into the labyrinth of alleys, where family hearths became killing grounds. It was midday on the 5th. The sun, a hammer on anvils of upturned hearths, haze from smouldering thatch blurring the line between sky and smoke. The Tanit enclave spilled into the merchant quarter, narrow lanes flanked by insulae of sun-baked brick, their balconies festooned with drying garlands now trampled underfoot. Roman hastati, sweat-sheened and reeking of garum rations, probed doorways with javelins, while velites hurled torches through lattices, flames licking like inquisitive tongues. Elsewhere, Hasdrubal's rearguard clashed in the agora, their scythed chariots relics of Hannibal's era mired in debris. Political undercurrents surged. Scipio's dispatches to the Senate promised final accounting, staving off tribunician probes into war costs. Present were the virgins' extended kin artisans in wool-dyed tunics, their tools repurposed as spears, elders with rheumy eyes reciting genealogies to steal young hearts. Sensory barrage, the sizzle of oil, lamps overturned in panic, acrid bite of burning spelt bread, metallic tang on tongues from bitten cheeks, textures of splintered cedar beams snagging flesh, the gritty slide of ash under sandals. Priestess Miriam, 28, widow of a fallen navigator whose galley sank off Sardinia, had sought refuge here with her charges. Her background was the harbor's pulse. Orphaned young, pledged to Tanit for the goddess's bounty on voyages, her nights filled with star charts and supplications for safe return. Strong-limbed from hauling sacred litters, she barricaded the vestry, her mind a whirl of half-remembered hymns, thinking of the daughter she left with kin too young for service. Her laughter a talisman against the dark. Among the victims were families with young children, their presence a heartbreaking context to the chaos. Fates documented in Appian's tallies, but too cruel to detail here. The youngest suffered separations too profound. Their cries, a chorus the records echo faintly. Focus instead on Miriam, adult and resolute, as soldiers battered the inner doors. Tension mounted, feigned retreats luring pursuers into traps of caltrops, then the breach, shields parting like a wound. The act unfolded in restraint defenders overwhelmed, breaths halting in the fray, the living bound for triage. Miriam, hauled forth, inspected like a vase in the auction yard, her dignity stripped in a cordoned peristyle. Led away amid the hush of held breaths, the space emptied of sound save distant clashes. Returned hours later, she staggered, eyes hollowed by an inner eclipse, yet she gathered a fallen veil, folding it with deliberate care, a gesture of unbroken right. Her whisper, the goddess sees, a thread pulled taut. This phase exposed the system's anatomy, not individual fury, but hierarchical delegation, where Optio's tallied house clears to justify grain allotments. It mirrored empire-wide patterns Corinth's women similarly dispersed, Purporzania's highlighting gender as leverage, bodies as bargaining chips in the slave economy. Modern echoes resound in refugee crises, where sacred sites become detention hubs, faith weaponized for control. Debate persists. Polybius attributes it to discipline lapse, but Miles sees intent. Scipio's orders prioritizing non-combatant extraction for resale. Societal scars lingered Punic matrons in Roman households seeding syncretic cults, Tanit morphing into Juno Caelestis by Augustus's era. The machine sought not heroes but hollows. Families sundered ensured no lineages to reclaim soil. By targeting kin networks around temples, it frayed the social weave, turning communal altars into solitary pyres. Livy's epitome notes thousands per quadrant, but the deeper cut was psychological. Survivors haunted by absent voices, the vows' guardians now vectors of loss. Scipio's protocol endured, a template for Pompey's Eastern purges, proving erasure's efficiency costly in lives, cheap in legacy. What happened next reveals the core desecration, the third phase zeroing on the sanctuaries themselves, where faith's flame met the legion's gale. Dusk of the sixth day, shadows pooling in the Byrsa's crevices like spilled ink, a sirocco moaning through cypress groves heavy with the day's toll. The temple complex, a terraced marvel of Punic opus Africanum, rammed earth and tufa faced with limestone dominated the hill. Its propylaea, guarded by sphinxes, now toppled like felled sentinels. Roman triarii, grizzled rearguards in chainmail cloaks, ascended via switchbacks littered with spent arrows, their cornicines blaring advances that echoed off the citadel. Hasdrubal's holdouts fired Greek fire from the parapets, gouts of green flame hissing in the brine air. Context deepened. Scipio, ensconced in the captured esplanade, consulted augurs over quartered oxen, entrails promising Victoria Certa, while Senate envoys fresh from Ostia inspected yields, pressing for cultural nullification. Witnesses included the remaining virgins' attendants, slaves in ragged peplos clutching incense burners, their skins prickled by the chill wind carrying ash flakes like grey snow. Atmosphere thickened, low chants of Tanit's litany, mingling with the groan of stressed beams, smells of myrrh clashing with sulphurous pitch, tastes of bile rising in parched throats. The rasp of mail on stone, the yielding crunch of sacred tiles under boots. Priestess Dido, 19, named for the foundress, embodied the vow's purity slender as a votive stele, her braids bound with moonstone beads, pledged after a dream vision of the goddess amid olive groves. Her world was the inner Aditon, scripting oracles on vellum, pondering the stars' alignment for the city's wane. Family echoes. A father lost to the Second War's reparations, sisters scattered in Leptis. As the cohort breached the naos, tension-crested acolytes dousing flames with sand to deny the foe light, then the shatter of cedar doors. Dido stood at the goddess's pedestal, arms raised, her pulse a frantic tattoo. The incursion was methodical. Altars overturned with methodical lever, votives crated for the aerarium. She was pulled forward, appraised in the flickering lamplight, her sanctity a curiosity to the triumphator's aides. The lead-up dragged, questions barked in bastard Greek, her silence a shield. Then, the removal to a veiled annex, the sanctuary's hush, broken only by distant routes. Skipped in detail, the desecration lingered in implication, the air after heavy with unspoken rupture. Brought back at moonrise, Dido collapsed against the plinth, her form unbowed in posture but fractured within, yet she traced Tanit's sign in the dust, a sigil that endured. The face turns not, she breathed, defiance etched in exhaustion. Here, the system bared its theological blade, not conquest but conversion by force, temples as ideological assets to be liquidated. Power structures, crystallized pontifex, Maximus proxies, deeming foreign rites, nefanda, justifying sacrilege as piety. This slotted into patterns from Jerusalem's sack in 63 BC to Teutoburg's aftermath, where God's vessels became spoils. Parallels today. Iconoclasm in conflict zones. Bamiyan Buddhas dynamited to assert dominion. Scholars diverge. Goldsworthy views it tactical, denying morale boosts. Miles, cultural genocide, per UN definitions. Impacts rippled. Roman Carthage refounded in 29 BC, syncretized Tanit as Caelestis, but underground Punic amulets persisted, fueling Berber revolts. The goal: ghosts over guardians, desecrated vows birthing apostasy, not altars. By assaulting the Aditon, the machine didn't merely loot, it reprogrammed reverence into revulsion, social bonds loosening as faith's anchors dragged. Diodorus records sanctum violations sparking mutinies among auxiliaries, a glitch in the network. Scipio's calculus prevailed, a model for Theodosius's pagan purges, underscoring erasure's allure eternal in its vacancy, yet vulnerable to memory's quiet reclamation. On the seventh dawn, the fourth phase engulfed the Acropolis. the last redoubt where desperation forged phalanxes from scribes and sailors. Dawn's light slanted gold across the citadel's battlements, but the air hung leaden with defeat's foretaste, gulls wheeling over corpses bobbing in the Cothan harbour below. The Byrsa plateau, ringed by cyclopean walls, bristled with improvised ballistae, their creaks like arthritic joints in the still air. Scipio's legions, rotated to stave off exhaustion per Polybius's note on morale protocols, wheeled up siege towers, grapnels biting parapets with iron teeth. Hasdrubal's final 900 souls, including temple refugees, manned the ramparts, their falcatas flashing in futile arcs. Broader canvas. Envoys from allied kings tallied shares, while in Rome, augurs sacrificed white bulls for the triumph's auspices. The virgin survivors, herded to the plateau's edge, shivered in tattered veils, their bare feet raw on granite. Build up slow. Catapults thump sending lithoi hurtling, shattering colonnades into dust, choked veils. Sounds of splintering ashlar, Punic laments twining with Latin jeers. Sense of cordite from quicklime grenades. Bitter aftertaste of unswallowed dread. The grind of wicker against stone, the warm stickiness of proximity. Priestess Salambo, 32, veteran of the blockade's vigils, led the remnant her frame wiry from rationed figs, eyes fierce as a lioness's under ritual scars. From a line of Suffet priests, she had transcribed the sacred annals, her quill capturing eclipses as omens, heart anchored in the vow's unyielding rhythm. Thoughts turned to her absent kin, scattered in the exodus of 149. As towers mated with walls, tension-peaked defenders pouring boiling pitch, screams rising as it clung like molten tar. The overrun was inexorable, breaches widening, maniples pouring through like floodwaters. Salambo fought with a pilfered gladius, her strikes precise, but numbers prevailed, the fall marked by silenced gasps. Bound amid the melee, she faced the triage in the temple's forecourt, now a makeshift vallum, her resolve probed like ore in a furnace. The extraction to shadowed tents, the collective hush as sisters vanished one by one. Upon return, Salambo rallied the broken, her voice a rasp. We are the face, we turn. Unshattered, in essence, though the machine claimed its toll. The system's pulse quickened here, hierarchical escalation, where captives became propaganda, paraded to cow holdouts. It echoed Veientine precedents, women as trophies in triumphs per Livy, gender weaponized, bodies narrating subjugation, contemporary shadows, forced migrations framing rehabilitation as erasure. Interpretation splits. Appian sees chaos, but moderns like Hoyos, in Mastering the West, discern strategy. Scipio's rotations preserving discipline for the hall. Society fractured further enslaved networks, birthing hybrid cults in Ostia, Tanit's persistence, a subversive code. No martyrs desired, ghosts dilute resistance. This phase targeted the vow's collective, unraveling communal spirit, leaving individuals as flotsam. The machine's genius, efficiency in isolation, bonds severed like temple cords. Scipio's oversight ensured continuity, a harbinger for Caesar's Gallic tallies, where erasure promised stability's illusion. While the Acropolis burned, the fifth phase sealed the dispersal, the auction that scattered seeds of silence across the empire. Twilight of the seventh, the citadel, a pyre of flickering brands, embers dancing like malevolent fireflies against the violet sea. The summit, once sacred to Eshmun the healer, now a sprawl of trampled tents and stacked arms, hummed with the low buzz of commerce amid ruin. Scipio's quaestors, in crisp togas, scribbled with wax tablets, herded the 50,000 survivors per Appian's count into cordons ringed by speculatores, the air thick with the musk of unwashed bodies and the sharp ozone of quenched fires. Hasdrubal surrendered in Tanit's Adyton, his wife and sons perishing in self-immolation, a final defiance the machine noted but dismissed. Global stakes loomed, proceeds to fund African province, quelling Italian unrest. The virgins, diminished to 11, stood chained in a line, their veils replaced by rough-spun sacks, feet blistered on the descent path. Atmosphere oppressive, murmurs in fractured Punic, the clink of gyves like mocking bells, smells of offal from hasty pyres, metallic tang of auctioneers' coins, the chafe of hemp ropes, the numb weight of exhaustion. Priestess Ashtoreth, 25, scribe of the lunar cycles, had survived the melee, her mind a repository of unvoiced oracles, family, a ghost of coastal traders lost to Roman galleys. Her vow sustained her through the march down Byrsa. Thoughts of Tanit's eternal gaze a bulwark. At the harbour pens, tension-crested buyers from Italy and Greece, appraising like livestock, bids called in sesterces. Ashtoreth, Mark's sanctuary grade, was led to the block, her history bartered in whispers. The dispersal implied, lots drawn, ships loaded for Ostia, the hold sway, a new nausea. In transit's void, she etched sigils on planks, resistance etched in wood. Landed in Brundisium, her gaze met the Tiber's flow, vacant, yet vigilant. The flame crosses waters. This coda unveiled the system's endgame, economic alchemy, turning defeat into dividend, slaves as vectors of assimilation, power's architecture, auctions as senatorial revenue, per Livy's financial logs, patterns recurred from Athenian Melian sales to Ottoman devshirm, modern analogues, human trafficking networks masked as relocation, debate, Polybius Lord's order, but Miles decries cultural lobotomy, impacts vast Punic artisans shaping Roman mosaics, Tanit icons in Pompeii, villas, seeding resilience, ghosts over genealogies, dispersal ensured no focal resistance. The machine triumphed, but cracks showed escaped slaves founding maroon communities in Sicily. Scipio's triumph in 146 paraded effigies, but the true spoil was the blueprint, erasure as empire's mortar. If you're still here, it's because you sense that bearing witness forges the antidote. What follows tests that resolve deeper. Pause if needed. For those pressing on, we'll trace the fracture together, honoring the unyielded. While Scipio orchestrated the temple's unmaking, he erred crucially, underestimating memory's insurgency. The conspiracy brewed not in daggers, but in diaspora whispers, a resistance woven from the Virgin's surviving sigils. Conspirators emerged from the enslaved fringes, Numidian grooms in legion stables, Greek tutors in patrician homes, Punic cooks in Subura taverns, who pieced fragments of lore from the scattered 11. Their leader, a former acolyte named Hanno, 29, and branded on his cheek, had smuggled vellum scraps etched with Tanit's hymns during the auction, his motivation rooted in a brother's execution at Nephoris. Vengeance, not for blood, but for the vow's desecration, a quiet fury that Rome could chain bodies but not the goddess's gaze. Others joined, a Brundisium merchant's wife, Miriam's kin, who overheard bids and funneled coin to runners, a Ostian docker, Dido's uncle, smuggling amulets in amphorae. Motivations layered spiritual restitution for some, profit in black market relics for others, but all bound by the shared scar of erasure, their network, a shadow Suffet's council spanning from Capua to Ephesus. The plot unfolded in increments, subtle as tides creep. From 145 BC, couriers disguised as traders carried clay seals stamped with the triangle sign, linking safe houses where survivors recited litanies, rebuilding the flame in hidden Leraria. By 140, under cover of bacchanalian frenzies suppressed that year, but lingering in ports, they convened in a Capuan catacomb, pooling testimonies. Elissa's spat defiance, Salambo's folded veil, Hanno coordinated via coded merchant ledgers, amassing a cache of votives bought back from auctions, their distribution seeding micro-sanctuaries. Tension mounted in 132 BC, as Scipio, now censor, cracked down on Oriental superstitions, his edicts torching suspect shrines. The climax struck January 129 BC, present tense gripping. Fog cloaks the Palatine, Scipio's villa aglow with oil lamps as he pores over Numantine dispatches. A gift arrives, an amphora of African figs, laced with aconite from Punic gardens. He sips wine, unaware, the poisons burn subtle as betrayal. By dawn he succumbs, breath faltering in his tablinum, attendants finding him rigid, eyes staring at the unyielding ceiling. No blade, no tumult, just the system's quiet recoil. Aftermath cascaded, the poison pinned on Gracchus' allies, sparking trials that devoured optimates, power sluicing to Marius's populists. Conspirators scattered Hanno vanished into Sardinian hills, his network fracturing but not fading, sigils surfacing in Pompeii graffiti. Chaos immediate. Scipio's funeral pyre on the Campus Martius drew mobs chanting Delenda, ironically at the elite, riots gutting Subura, Punic quarters. Others perished, 2 envoys garroted in transit, a Greek tutor exiled to Bithynia. The machine stuttered, Senate purging 300 senators in purges, but endured, recalibrating under Metellus. This is what happens when the blade turns inward, devouring indiscriminately, yet reforming sharper. The system survived, Virgin's echoes persisting in the cracks. In 1833, amid the French conquest of Algiers' echoes, a young lieutenant named Pierre Sevin, dust-caked and feverish under Tunisian sun, stumbled upon an anomaly in the Byrsa excavations. A cache of terracotta figurines, moon-faced and defiant, buried not in ash but in deliberate pits. Their bases inscribed with Punic script invoking Tanit pen Baal. The date, July 12, his spade striking not rubble but a sealed urn, heart leaping as fragments tumbled 21 in all, matching Appian's vague sanctuary count. Sevin's hands shook, dirt crumbling like forgotten prayers, a thrill mingling with awe at touching what Rome meant to pulverize. What emerged? Not mere idols, but talismans etched with sigils and micro-inscriptions, Tanit face turns, in characters defying 2 millennia's erosion. Scientific dating followed. Thermoluminescence in 1,840 seconds labs pinned them to 146 to 140 BC, carbon traces on organic residues confirming post-sack interment. Pottery shards nearby, stamped with Ostian slave marks, proved the link. Virgin's remnants, smuggled and reburied by the network, a deliberate archive against oblivion. It proved erasure's failure, faith's portability, vows etched deeper than stone. Why it matters pierces now. This find, housed in the Bardo Museum since 1885, bridges antiquity to our fractured present, teaching that power's erasers leave traces for the patient digger. Psychological insights abound resilience, as adaptive defiance, the mind's vow outlasting chains, echoing in trauma studies, where survivors reclaim narratives from oppressors. Parallel sting. Indigenous boarding schools kill the Indian, save the man, or Uyghur re-education camps, where sacred tongues twist into silence. Remembering matters because it denies the machine's endgame. These sigils, unearthed against odds, affirm that cultural genocide breeds hybrid vigor, Tanit birthing Caelestis in Roman pantheons. It's not about theology, it's power's peril when it erases persons, and the miracle when they refuse vanishing. The Republic endured 600 years, but couldn't bury 11 women's sigils and stubborn faith. Think on that. Victory redefined not by pyres, but by pits that outweighed empires. They didn't witness refounding. Their mark was the refusal, a lesson in witness. To remember is to rebuild, one fragment at a time. The temple virgins were meant to disappear. That was the blueprint, etched in senatorial wax and legionary orders, a vanishing act scripted for the ages, their flames snuffed, their veils unraveled, their gods recast as curios in Triumphator's atria. But they didn't vanish, they're still here. In those Bardo figurines, defiant under glass, in the Punic graffiti scrawled on Ostian walls, defying limewash. In the ground, Sevin turned, layer by layer, against the grain of forgetting. And now they're here with you, in the words we've reclaimed, the silences we've pierced with questions. Because you chose immersion over indifference. Because you let their sensory world, the myrrh, the salt, the unyielding stone, flood your own. Because you refused to let senatorial ledgers be the final script. In the tongue of Tyre, they inscribed, Tanit face of Baal, the turning endures. Translation: the goddess's gaze pivots eternal. You're not mere reader, you're steward. Witnessing binds the past to pulse, a thread against unraveling. These stories matter because they map the machinery still humming empires rebranded as NGOs, erasures digitized as progress. We owe the past not pity, but precision. To name the systems, honor the humanized, redirect from innocence's harm to resilience's raw. In grappling their dark, we light our own conversations that convert horror to horizon, ensuring no vow goes unvoiced again. What struck you in their defiance? The machine's hum or the sigil's spark? Share below. Your words extend the network. If this resonance calls you to unearth more silences shattered, blueprints exposed, subscribe. Not for spectacle, but for the buried voices that demand daylight, the resistances that rewrite ruin,